Well, welcome, all you wiretappers, back here in the studio of Gangland Wire with the second episode with Robert Mazur, who was the original Infiltrator. If you saw the movie with Bryan Cranston, it's a great movie. Go watch it. It's streaming on one of the streaming channels. I just watched it again the other day. And today he's going to tell about his next case after that first Infiltrator case. And it's going to end up being a movie, too. There's no doubt about it. He's got a book out right now called The Betrayal that's about it. And in this next case, he's going to talk about how he goes down to Panama and he's laundering money for Colombian cartel people again. And he's got a DEA agent that's ratting him out the whole time. So let's sit back and listen to Robert Mazur. Now, let's move on to your second book, The Betrayal, and that tagline on that, your brush with death. You already had a few brushes with death. You must have had even closer brushes with death than The Betrayal now. But that was a second case a few years after the Infiltrator case, correct?
Yeah, when the Infiltrator went down, I spent the next 2 years preparing for and testifying in trials. So trials around the United States and trials over in the UK. The longest trial in Tampa was 6 months, and I was on the witness stand from the middle of March to the middle of June. It should be in the Guinness Book of Records. I don't think anybody testified for 3 months before,
Really?
But anyway. But near the end of that, I was approached by the assistant special agent in charge of the Tampa DEA office, and he knew that I was interested in moving on to another agency. At that stage, I had burned a few bridges, to say the least. There was some internal squabbling about, in my view, an unreasonable withdrawal of resources from the Infiltrator matter at the time that it was most important to keep them. So he said, we'd really like to do a long-term UC op like what you just did. And, are you willing to come over to DEA? And I said, well, Mike, here's two things. One, my daughter's got 2 years before she starts college. So I would really want to be in Tampa. I can't move them now. They've been through hell. So I really want to be in Tampa. And two, I can't take a pay cut. I was GS 13, step 10, which was the highest you could be on the street. And I had no interest in being a supervisor. I said, I just need to be pay lateral over. And I don't think that had been done before. But Mike is an amazing leader, and he got that done. So then I went on to the DEA Academy, went through Quantico, got some time, but not a lot of time, maybe about 6 months to put together the new front, new identity, embedded in businesses again, that type of thing. And this time we were going after the Cali cartel, which is only a few hundred miles away from Medellin, but so many people that I had dealt with had been killed. And the Medellin cartel by that time was somewhat on the run, that I thought that this was something that I could do. And they also wanted me to infiltrate some underworld people, some Panamanian underworld people. So after we got the UC front together, we started that operation. We had tremendous success right out of the block. My informant in Colombia introduced us to two money brokers in Bogota who knew Miguel Rodriguez Orjuela, the head of the Cali cartel, and many of the other major Cali guys. These guys were really, really polished. They had a finance company in Bogota that managed on the surface, managed the affairs of dozens and dozens of import-export companies that were fronts for the repatriation of narco dollars back into Colombia. And they were working very closely with about 10 banks in Colombia, the major one of which that I started dealing with was Banco Cafetero. And so I was dealing with officers in Banco Cafetero who were corrupt and who were intentionally laundering this money. They were later charged. And actually, the guy pled guilty. But all of a sudden, though, things started not to go that well with the two guys from Bogota that I met. And I had met them with a guy who was assigned to DEA. Little did I know later on, and I don't want to give too much of the book away because I try to keep it a little bit suspenseful, but one of my colleagues, 2 years before I even got there, was already moving dope, laundering money, selling information. And at the worst possible time, he outed me to the higher ups in the Cali cartel.
Wow.
And
now, Robert, let me ask you one question. Now, you said by UC front, your undercover front, for folks. Now, what did you guys start a business? Did you like open up some kind of a financial services business or some kind of what was that? Like
sure.
Get a storefront, kind of the technical aspects of how.
No storefronts. I'm a firm believer of, businesses have to operate like real businesses 5 days a week. And so what I did, I had a very good friend in the financial sector who had just shut down an investment company and a mortgage business. And so I used a law firm where a former prosecutor was then at. And on paper, we bought it. So it was two companies that had 7 years of history to them.
I see.
I got all the records of those companies, filled up the new location that we opened up for it in Sarasota. It was a trade finance company, so it worked out perfect for the Cali cartel, who were laundering principally through fake export transaction documentation. And me having a company that was a trade finance business, we could come up with a very believable cover and paperwork that made everything look legitimate. So, and I had a CI I had a source who was in that physical location with another person every single day. I was there whenever I wasn't in Panama. I was almost always in that office in Sarasota. So, but I spent a lot of time in Panama, and I had a little suite in the El Panama Hotel that I operated from there, and some bad guys who had formed companies for me in Panama that I was dealing with. So even though we didn't,
let me ask one other quick question about that. Now, did you do other legitimate business at the same time? Try to find some little pieces of legitimate business you could do, or did you just not do anything but focus on working with the cartels and laundering their money?
No, the cartel thought that we were, doing all types of other things, but no, we weren't. We weren't really doing. It's not like you opened up a money service business and you check you cash checks for people and stuff like that. We had so much money movement and paper that was moving around just for dealing with the Cali cartel that you really wouldn't have had enough time to to be able to do too much else. So
I got you. So now let's go back to you. You've been compromised, or at least somewhat compromised, by a rogue DEA agent, and you're in Panama a lot, which means you don't have that much backup, I don't imagine, in Panama.
Right. Yeah. And I was not only there, I was in Colombia. So and the two guys who knew who I was, and at that stage, I had my suspicions, but we didn't have anything that we could really nail down. So I went down to Colombia because I really, at that stage, so I was told at the time, and I don't know for certain that this is the case, but at least this is, I can guarantee you this is what I was told, that at that stage, and that was, I went down to Colombia in 1992. So at that stage, they told me that there had not been anyone working undercover there in 8 years, and it was forbidden to do that. And actually, that was one of the things the corrupt officer told the Cali people, that agents couldn't go down there. So I got to go down, And I held court at a really nice restaurant for most of the day. We scattered our appointments out throughout the day. And the two guys that, unbeknownst to me at that time, knew I was a DEA agent, were trying their damnedest to get me to stay. They were really bad guys, and they really had some powerful connections. They'd been kidnapped many times themselves. I'm confident that if we didn't stick with our plan, and I didn't leave when I was supposed to leave, that they probably would have tried to kidnap me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was bad. And then the Panama thing was bad. But then there came a time we got absolute proof. I received information. Our Fort Lauderdale office had a non-testifying informant, a female, who was at the highest levels of the Cali cartel and dealing with many, many of the owners of the money. And she was in a meeting when one of the two guys that I had met, that I told you before, were starting to get squirrely with me.
Yeah.
And that guy said, "Boy, you're not going to believe what we've got. We've got this cop on a take. And we know that this guy in Sarasota is a DEA agent and blah, 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 blah." And she reported that back to her handlers. Her handlers called us. It was no doubt. Now, based on the details she gave us, it was who we thought it was. But I became obsessed at that time to be a part of the evidence collection to make sure that cop got as much prison time as possible. And so I begged my boss, and he allowed me to continue for 3 months to work undercover. I was allowed to go back to Panama, but I had to have a little more cover than I did before. But I was told, you're getting 90 days and that's it, man. 90 days, we're taking this thing down. So I wound up disinformation him for a time, and we were able to get a lot of very good stuff. Right near the end, he approaches me. "Oh man, buddy, it's like we haven't been together in so long. Let's go out for lunch." And I knew, thanks to Joe Pistone and other people who trained me, I knew that the last question he was going to ask me before we left that meeting was going to be the most important question in his mind.
Yeah. And
so as we were getting ready to leave, and he insisted on picking up the tab, and he's looking in his wallet, and he says, "Hey, have you guys decided when you're going to take down that undercover op?" I said, and I was ready for it.
Yeah. And
I said, now this is probably in January. So I said, "Man, this is going to be great. We're going to have tickets in June to the World Cup in Orlando. And these guys are going to be falling over each other trying to get tickets. And we're going to put them up in hotels, and their family's going to be able to go to Disney World and all this other stuff." So he ran with that.
Yeah.
And about 2 months later, when we took the case down, my boss called him and said, "Hey, let's get together. Some things changed. We have to move fast." And so he comes into the office and meets with my boss, and my boss goes, "Gosh, we're taking the case down today. And we'd really like you to join us for a victory drink tonight. And by the way, one of those two guys from Bogota that you met, he's at the hotel. We found out from customs he's in the country, and he's going to be staying at the Doral Beach Resort. And so we've got a team out there, and we'll be collaring his butt." And he goes, "Come on, well, how about hanging out with us for a while?" And the cop goes, "Oh, I got so many reports I got to do." And
Yeah.
so he gets in his car. Little does he know, we've got an Air Force up there with a gyro camera.
Yes.
And so he goes to a payphone, then he goes to another payphone, then he goes to another payphone. And then he meets with some local Colombians who are working with the Cali cartel. And he's talking to them, and the guy goes, why the hell would they tell you? I'll bet you they followed your ass right here. You better come up with some good answers for why you're here. So anyway, I don't want to give too much more away. We had to do a lot of other things, and then he eventually got 11 years in prison.
Wow.
So that was a good thing.
Yeah, that was, because I know we tried to take off a corrupt guy, and it's a small deal, but it's really hard to take off a cop when there's a lot. It's just like information that's going around, and to get somebody to testify, if you don't have some face-to-face person that's talk with him and giving him money, just gathering it on circumstantial, it's really tough. We had a guy that he picked up some money. We followed him, and it was marked and serial numbers recorded, and we were going to get him at the station. And guess what? That evening, he didn't have the money. We don't know what he did with it. So it's really tough, because they got their antenna up all the time for other law enforcement. Those cases are hard to make.
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty exciting.
As I wrote the Betrayal, though, I really came to the conclusion that that's the obvious betrayal, but there are deeper betrayals that I learned as a result of completing that second operation. 5 years working undercover with major criminal organizations. It's obvious to me that, unfortunately, and I think they credit Albert Einstein with this, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And we do the same thing over and over in this war against drugs. And we need to look in the mirror and recognize that there's some very critical things that need to change. The fact of the matter is that when it comes to illicit funds around the world, the United Nations on Drugs and Crime calculated it with help from all the member nations at about $2 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. So $2 trillion a year. I mean, you're talking about everything from tax evasion to drug trafficking, illegal arms dealing, pilfering treasuries, dealing with sanctioned nations, all that good stuff. So of that, 400 billion, they estimate, is the annual receipts for the sale of illegal drugs. When you go to the Department of Justice asset forfeiture website and look at asset seizures and get into the nitty gritty, of that 400 billion, in the best of years, the U.S. government can't boast of taking more than $1 billion. Mm-hmm. That's 1/4 of 1%. Mm-hmm. Globally, I think 98% goes totally unseen, which is why the coffers of these criminal organizations grow exponentially, and corruption, which is their most lethal product, is growing at that same rate. And who'd have thought that it would be typical to say, as it is in 2021 last year, okay, DEA is working on a case and they're trying to identify this very mystical person who's referred to on calls as El Padrino, the Godfather. And he's helping them to get routes to take dope into the U.S. He's compromising law enforcement. He's doing all kinds of stuff. And eventually they identify him. And he is General Cienfuegos, the Minister of Defense of the entire country of Mexico. Yeah. And we've just recently indicted the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez. His brother's in prison for the rest of his life, along with about 10 senators from Honduras for selling out their country. We've got massive problems that relate to this. And that also translates to the more than 100,000 deaths last year from fentanyl overdose in the United States. This problem is significantly worse than it was in Pablo Escobar's heyday.
Yeah. It just as long as they keep the shootouts at the Dadeland Mall down, that they don't pay that money. They figured that out. Yep. We don't pay that much attention unless there's something that grabs their attention in the headlines. So just keep it sub rosa, so to speak, and there's just jillions of dollars to be made. I know I talked to a guy who was actually from Australia, and he talked about helping them with a payoff for a judge down in Mexico, $30 million. And but when you got that much money, to throw around, to corrupt people. It's, it's amazing. And the cash money is what you need to corrupt people with.
Yeah. And you can look at the testimony in the El Chapo Guzman trial and the related trials that occurred not that long ago. And the testimony there from one of the government's witnesses was that Enrique Peña, the former president of Mexico, approached through his people the Sinaloa cartel, offering El Chapo Guzman safety if he'd pay $250 million. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately for him, according to the witness, El Chapo moved that down to 100 million and had it delivered. And so he lost 150 million out of that requested bribe. But, and there was also testimony about the current president of Mexico before he took office and when he ran in prior years of his being paid massive amounts of money. So, we've got major problems, no doubt about it, south of the border: Venezuela, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, you name it. It's hard to tell the good guys from the bad guys.
Yeah. And I can see why. You look at the economies down there and the opportunity for people. And, this is huge opportunity. It's just like in the ghettos on the streets in Kansas City or New York or whatever. You don't have much opportunity. You got young, bright men. And, here's an opportunity, kind of like the mafia during Prohibition. It's a huge opportunity that, otherwise there wasn't that much opportunity for them. I don't know. It's tough.
I don't think we're focused enough on the demand side. I know that what we do on the supply side is critical. I think we need to go after the heads of the snakes, cut them off, and try to disrupt command and control. But too much of the federal law enforcement resources are applied toward the low-hanging fruit of the tree.
Yeah,
and we wind up filling our prisons with people who are, in some instances, sick people who are drug users who need to be dealt with in a different way. The cheapest. I did a little bit of research about the cost of an inmate, and I think that the lowest was like about $27,000 a year, and the highest was like about $62,000 a year. But think about that, and we had 1.8 million people in prison in 2021. So that's why I think, and I know this gets controversial because some people think that it's not going to make a difference. I frankly think that it will. And that is that, we have offered people free education through high school since my grandparents were going to high school.
Yeah.
A long period of time. I think we need to up the bar, especially for those people who live in underprivileged, underserved communities. And I'm not suggesting that anything should be based upon anything other than your income and your ability to be able to educate your children. And in those instances where they can't, I don't think it's a big ask to provide for individuals to be able to get a state college tuition through at least the second year. And if you're doing really well, you should be able to get 4 or go to a trade school or provide education. Now, this isn't going to stop the supply side. This is going to help us on the demand side. I'd much rather pay $6,200 a year to put a kid through college than pay $27,000 or $67,000 a year to maintain him in a prison.
Really?
I don't see the benefit in that. And I recognize that some people think that that's kind of a socialist thinking, but I don't think that it is. I frankly think that there are segments of our society that do not get an equal opportunity at education or economic equality.
Yeah.
And as long as you're going to foster that in those areas, you're going to get a group of people who go, here's my options.
Yeah.
And just think about how this could, in 2 generations, how this could change things. You take people who then become productive citizens, who pay taxes, who then have children, who then they impart on them that same concept of the importance of education and employment. You can have a demand side impact. I think that's a must. And my other musts are, I'm tired of seeing banks getting fined for laundering drug money or committing criminal offenses. HSBC paid $1.9 billion in fines and got caught red-handed laundering money for the Medellin cartel, the Sinaloa cartel and the Norte de Valle cartels. And Wachovia Bank, an American bank that was bought by Wells Fargo, got caught in that exact same plan. And they only got fined and nobody went to prison. Individual responsibility is extremely important. I'll tell you what, I interviewed the BCCI bankers in orange jumpsuits when they were behind bars. And to a hardcore druggie, 12 years isn't a big deal, but I can guarantee you to a polished fingernail banker, that's a lifetime. And that really got them to open their eyes and their mouths to sharing the truth. And unless we attack the corrupt portions of the international banking and business community that provide money laundering services to these people, this is going to continue to go on and on. Look at today's world with us trying to sanction Putin. The same bankers and lawyers who create all these veils of secrecy are the same ones that help them to hide their corrupt profits from pilfering the treasuries of Russia. There's a lot to be gained by going after these professional money launderers that are around the world. And my last thing in my epilogue that I talk about is corruption. There should be absolutely zero tolerance for corruption. We need to, when the corruption occurs, it's like the Cienfuegos matter. How do you justify? Cienfuegos gets arrested in California. He's held without bond. This is the defense minister of Mexico. Within 30 days of crying about it by the president of Mexico, telling Attorney General Barr that, we want to protect our own sovereignty. We'll take him back and we will prosecute any crimes that he's committed. And we do that. And within 30 days, they come back and they say, he didn't do anything wrong. And they let him go. That's not how corruption should be dealt with.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a tough one at that level. It's easy at the low level, but boy, at that level, you got too many people on board. There, money talks and bullshit walks, and money does talk. Or as Dylan said, it doesn't talk; it swears. It's amazing. And you're like the third or fourth career drug person on the law enforcement side that I've talked to that said, we've been doing this all wrong. We need to change our tactics. We got to do something different. And some people talk about also putting a lot of money into treatment and dealing with drug addiction on the, more on the street level and really making, a lot more opportunities available for people to find treatment once they get started. Because young people, they just want to feel different. They want to grow up and they want to experiment. And then when they have a problem with it, they need someplace to go. So it's kind of a multi fingered thing that we have to do over the next few years if we're ever going to change anything in that.
Yeah, I echoed that in my epilogue, and I have firsthand knowledge of that because I have two cousins who have overdosed on heroin, and one who was on his way, who lived in New Jersey and in Camden and Carteret. And it took me a month to be able to get him a bed in a state supported drug treatment program. There just were way too many people and way too few beds. Yeah. And it's not that they didn't want to help. It's just, they couldn't based upon the budgets that they were provided. Yeah. Thank goodness he then went from there to a church sponsored treatment program, and now actually works as a cook there and serves those who are now suffering the way that he was suffering, and so the end of his story is a good one.
Yeah, it is, and it's not always that good of an end for a lot of people, and many people will go to treatment more than once, but sooner or later it'll take. more than likely, not always, but without any kind of treatment or any options other than continue to use and steal in order to use and steal and use. And it's just there's no other option. So, All right, Robert, it's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on the show, and I congratulate you on your fine career. What are you doing now? You're not a guy that's retired to the golf course or fishing stories or meeting with your buds telling war stories. I got a feeling. What are you doing now?
Yeah, well, most of the time I'm either speaking someplace around the world. I just got back from Cairo. I'll be going to another country in Europe here in the not too distant future. And so I try to get out to the private sector, to those people who are in the anti-money laundering compliance field, to inspire them and to share with them information about how to identify risk and how to mitigate risk. And, how do you tell whether the duck that's quacking and walking like a duck is really a duck? And so I try to provide education. I guess I call it edutainment because I mix it with the infiltrator story and the betrayal story, but then try to really deliver to them real information about the types of companies, the geographic areas, the types of products that are linked to big time money laundering. And then in addition to that, we're hopefully working on with Amazon Studios, an effort with a small team here to see if we can't turn The Betrayal into a screenplay for a sequel of The Infiltrator. So those are the major things that I'm doing now. I'm playing with the idea of writing a fiction law enforcement novel. So we'll see if that happens.
All right. Oh, one last question. Did you meet Bryan Cranston? Did you kind of coach him and things like that?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I coached him, but I spent a lot of time with Bryan, okay. and it's a really interesting phenomenon being the author of a nonfiction book and then being with people who are fictionalizing it to a certain extent on the screen.
I've heard this before.
The producer absolutely hated me because when I'm around and I'm making suggestions about what might be better in the screenplay and that type of thing, it takes time to make those adjustments, and time is money. Whereas the talent, the actors and the director love it and they're sponges. Yeah. So, I mean, even when I was there on the shoots, if you remember one of the last scenes is Bryan Cranston at Innisbrook Golf and Country Club, and he's standing there in the tuxedo. And then behind him, Roberto Alcaino, played by Benjamin Bratt, comes in out of the cold. And they had some kind of corny line that he said. And I said, Bryan, I would never say that. We were just kind of talking, whispering on the side. And he goes, well, what would you have said if Alcaino showed up? And I said, I probably would have said, it's wonderful to see you, but there's a part of me that wishes you weren't here. And he goes, man, we're using that. So, that became that line.
Yeah, that was in there. Cool.
That became that line. So, yeah.
All right.
But he's a great guy.
Yeah. Well, good. That's good.
Down to earth, really cared about me and my views, cared about my wife, spent time talking to my wife, spent time talking to my kids, was very, very mindful of the importance of trying to capture the chemistry of a law enforcement family going through this type of an ordeal. And I think he did a great job.
Yeah, I do too. He's a great actor, but he did do a good job with that part of it, because that was a significant part of the story was your family, that struggle. And every long-term undercover I've interviewed has had the same trouble. It's tough on families, man. It's really hard on families.
Yeah.
Okay, Robert, I appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be on your show.
All right. Well, folks, that was Robert Mazur, wrote The Infiltrator made a movie called The Infiltrator with Bryan Cranston, and his new book, The Betrayal, The True Story of My Brush with Death in the World of Narcos and Launderers. I appreciate y'all tuning in. This second part of a 2-part episode interview of him. He has a lot of things to say, both about his work as an undercover officer, an undercover agent, and the efficacy of our drug policy and where we have placed our money and maybe some ways to put our money to better use in fighting this horrible problem of drug addiction in the United States and really throughout the world. But we're more concerned with the United States. And I'm all for recovery. I think you all know that by now. PTSD, if you're a vet, go to the VA hotline or the VA website, find the VA hotline. If you got PTSD problems, and if you got any kind of drug or alcohol problems, there's a lot of help available for you out there. And that's part of the way we're going to solve this problem. And the other part is, as he was saying, is clamp down on these big banks that are laundering all this money and making it okay for these international criminals to, make more and more money. Because they can't do it alone. They cannot do it without legitimate businesses being corrupted. So thanks a lot, you guys, and keep coming back, coming back, coming back, coming back.